Hey, what's up guys? Joel Adams with Iridesium, and today we're going to be taking a look at creating some science fiction energy blasts. Basically, what we're going to be doing is using some particles, and then we're going to simulate the smoke on top of the particles, and the smoke is what is going to be rendered. The crazy thing about these shockwaves is how fast they render. I rendered almost all of these like in 2 minutes with 4 samples. Unfortunately, the baking time for the smoke simulation can get pretty high, but other than that, it's a pretty fast process that yields really nice results. So anyways, with that being said, let's jump right in and get started. Open up a new scene in Blender, and I'm going to hit Shift A and add in an icosphere. Tab into edit mode and hit subdivide smooth a couple of times. Then I'm going to add in a displacement modifier. I'll choose clouds. Then I'm going to set its mapping to global. I'm going to move to about frame 10 and hit I scaling and insert a keyframe. Then I'm going to scale it quite a ways down and hit I to insert a scaling keyframe again. Then I'm going to go back to the last keyframe on the timeline, and I'm going to scale it on the y-axis, so it's mainly expanding on the x and z axes and not on the y. Then I'm going to add a particle system, choose emitter. I'm going to set the end frame of our animation quite a ways down. I'll go with 50 for now. Then I am going to go under field weights, turn gravity off. I'm going to set the end frame for our emission to frame 9 and the start frame to frame 7. Then I'll go under velocity and turn the object emission up quite a bit. That way the particles kind of spray out. This is sort of like the initial velocity setting under the smoke simulator. I'm going to set the start frame forward to 8 so they all emit basically between frame 8 and frame 9. I'll turn the displacement strength down quite a bit so we get a more round simulation. Now I will turn the amount of particles up. I'm going with 5,000 to start out with. Then I'm going to hit Shift A, go force field and turbulence. I'm going to go to the turbulence settings and turn the strength up to 9. So that will give you something like this, kind of crazy wild energy, as you can already see. I'll turn the normal emission for the particles off and the object emission down quite a bit too. You can set the draw size of your particles up under the display settings if you want to be able to see them easier. Next, I'll add in a force field force and turn its strength up to 3. Just leave that at the origin point of your particle emitter. This will continue to push out the particles away from the sphere even after the particles have lost all of their object velocity. I'm turning the strength down a bit for the force field. Next, I'm going to physics and turning the drag and the damp way up, and that's way too high, so I'll tone them back down a little bit and turn the object emission up. You want the particles to sort of blast out with an initial force and then to slow down as their life comes to an end. I'll turn the size of the noise down on the turbulence force field. I'll turn the random lifetime up on the particles as well and set their lifetime down quite a bit. I'll go to 40. And as you can see, they all die off pretty quickly, and that is what we want. Now I'll turn up the amount of particles. I'll start with 10,000. Now select your emitter and go Object, Quick Effects, Quick Smoke. I'll grab the domain, hit Alt-G and Alt-S to set it to its default scaling, and then I will scale it up on everything except the Y-axis to allow it to enclose the simulation. I'm checking initial velocity for the particles and setting their flow source to the particle system that we created. I'll set my resolution to 1024 by 1024 so that we have a square render. That way we're not wasting any render time. I do not have a lamp in the scene, so the simulation is black. I'll go ahead and add in a lamp, and that should make things look a little nicer. Alright, now I'm turning the initial velocity up for the particles, and then I'm turning the smoke resolution up as well. As you can see right off the bat, that gives us a pretty good result. The smoke is rising after the initial impact, so I'm going to turn its temperature difference to 0 on the domain settings. I'll turn the dissolve on, check slow, and turn its time up to more like 10. This will allow the smoke simulation to dissolve at the end of its life. I'm going to set the end frame of our animation a little further ahead, like 90, and turn up the smoke resolution. I'll turn up the emission size of the particles and turn up the initial velocity for the particles as well under their smoke settings. So that's looking pretty good. Unfortunately, the viewport is getting pretty slow now. Next, I'll make a small 3D viewport down at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen and hit Shift-Z. I'll make the world background completely black, and then I'll go to the render settings and scroll down to transparency, uncheck that. Next, I'll go to the node editor, and while we are selected on our smoke domain texture, I'll hit Shift-A and add in an emission shader. I'll plug this directly into the volume input. That will get rid of all the other nodes that are there by default. Then I'll duplicate the attribute density node and plug that into the emission shader. Next, I'm going to turn off the render for the emitter on the smoke particles. That way we don't render anything except for smoke in the scene. And then I will hit render. That rendered pretty quick. I'm going to switch back to the 3D view and do a higher res simulation. I'll go 256 grid resolution divisions, and then I'll go to point cache and hit open VDB. Just make sure that your file is saved before you attempt to bake. The cache area will be grayed out if you have not saved yet. I'll use compression type zip, and the data depth will be float half. Next, I'll hit bake on that. Here it is, done baking. I'll now render that image out as well. Alright, here is the finished result, and you can see how much sharper the higher resolution one is. However, it is still not sharp enough for me, so I'm going to go down and hit free bake. Then I will go and turn on high resolution smoke. The default settings should be fine, so I will go ahead and hit bake again once that's on. Alright, here I am back with it completely finished, and it already looks sharper in the viewport. If you go down, there's a tab underneath all the others under the domain settings called Smoke Display. Here you can turn up the thickness quite a bit, and it's easier to tell what is going on. Then you've got draw velocity. If I was you, I would not check that, as Blender sometimes freezes up and crashes. I'm pretty sure it's a bug, but it could just be too much for Blender to render. And like I said, Blender crashed. Fortunately, I had saved and I did not lose my bake. Anyways, if you scroll down, there's another feature called Color Ramp. This is a pretty cool feature, and I actually end up using it quite a bit. If you turn the white value down and then turn the thickness of the smoke down quite a bit, it should give you a kind of interesting representation of your smoke. Next, I'll go and hit Shift-Z down in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen just to preview what my material looks like, and it looks pretty good. If I skip forward a bit on the timeline, I can move to the area where the smoke starts to dissolve. I'm going to add a brightness and contrast node in between the attribute and the emission shader. Here I will turn up the value of the contrast a bit and the brightness up just a little as well. The contrast is at 0.1 and the brightness is at 0.03. So now I'm going to add a directory to save my images in. I'm going to make sure they're saved as a PNG, and I'm going to hit animation. It's rendering a little slow, so I'm going to go and collapse output, open the sampling. I'm going to turn the render samples to 4. If you hit render on one of the frames with the simulation in it, it should render pretty fast and completely noiseless. Because it's an emission shader, the computer does not have to calculate any bounces. I'll set these samples down to 2, and that seems to look about the same as 4 samples. So I'm going to hit escape, and then I'm going to hit animation. And this is what we got from that animation. It's not quite as refined as I would like it, but if you want it to be sharper and more refined, just turn up the resolution on the smoke. As you can see, it looks pretty good and would work perfectly over live action footage as some sort of science fiction energy blast. If you want to get the science fiction coloring and glow that I did, all you have to do is go into After Effects and use a tritone as well as some glows and blurs, and you should get something like this. Just keep in mind that these do not have to be in a circle shape. You could do this in any shape, in any direction that you wanted to, and get some pretty cool results. Also remember, this does not have to be a shockwave or a round energy blast. It could also be a muzzle flash or an explosion of some kind. Just try to think about the possibilities and get creative. Now you have your own cinematic science fiction energy blasts. So anyways, that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you for watching. I will see you next time. This is Iridesium.